Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where lost truths, ancient mysteries, and forbidden history collide. Let's question the past and uncover what was never meant to be found. History is littered with the ruins of great cities that were once centers of power, only to be abandoned and lost to time. From plague-ridden ports to drought-stricken capitals, these ghost cities tell a story of how even the mightiest civilizations can vanish. In the vast fertile plains of central Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, lies a mound of earth that holds the secrets of one of the most profound transitions in human history. This is the archaeological site of Çatalhöyük, a name that has become synonymous with the very dawn of urban life. Flourishing between approximately 7500 BC and 5700 BC, during the Neolithic period, Çatalhöyük was not just a village. It was a sprawling, bustling, and incredibly complex settlement that can rightly be called one of the world's first cities. It was a place where thousands of people chose to live together in a dense, permanent community, a radical departure from the small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers that had defined the human experience for hundreds of thousands of years. The city of Çatalhöyük is a testament to a moment of incredible social and cultural innovation, a place where new ways of living, new forms of art, and new religious ideas were forged. Its most striking feature is its unique and bizarre architecture, a dense honeycomb of interconnected houses with no streets or doorways, a city that could only be entered from the rooftops. The city of Çatalhöyük was a massive settlement for its time. At its peak, it is estimated to have supported a population of between 5,000 and 8,000 people, a staggering concentration of humanity for the Neolithic period. The entire city was constructed from mud brick, a simple but effective building material made from a mixture of mud, straw, and water, which was formed into bricks and dried in the sun. What makes Çatalhöyük so extraordinary is its urban layout, or rather, its complete lack of one in the conventional sense. The city was not organized around streets, alleys, or public squares. Instead, it was a single, continuous architectural mass, a dense, tightly packed agglomeration of rectangular houses built right up against one another, with no space in between. From the air, the settlement would have looked like a giant, sprawling beehive or a single enormous multicellular organism. This unique architectural style had profound implications for how people moved and interacted within the city. With no streets or ground-level doors, the only way to get around was by walking across the rooftops. The roofs of the houses formed the streets and public spaces of the city. People would have spent a great deal of their time on the rooftops socializing, working, and performing daily tasks. To enter their own home, a resident of Çatalhöyük would have had to climb down a wooden ladder through an opening in their roof, which served as both a doorway and a chimney for the hearth below. This rooftop entry system also made the city incredibly defensible. The outer walls of the settlement formed a single, continuous, and windowless facade. With no ground-level entrances, any potential enemy would have been confronted with a sheer, blank wall of mud brick, a formidable defensive barrier that could only be scaled with great difficulty, all while being exposed to attack from the inhabitants on the rooftops. The interior of a Çatalhöyük house was a highly organized and standardized space, suggesting a society with strong and widely shared cultural conventions. Each house was a single-room dwelling, typically containing a hearth for cooking and warmth, and raised platforms that were used for sleeping and other domestic activities. The walls were meticulously plastered and often painted with elaborate murals. These murals are one of the artistic treasures of the Neolithic world. They depict a wide range of subjects, from geometric patterns and hunting scenes to depictions of wild animals like bulls, leopards, and vultures. Some murals are thought to depict mythological events or religious rituals, providing a rare and tantalizing glimpse into the belief system of these ancient people. The houses were also the place of the dead. The people of Çatalhöyük buried their deceased family members directly beneath the floors of their homes, often under the sleeping platforms. This practice suggests a powerful and intimate connection with their ancestors, a belief that the spirits of the dead remained an active and integral part of the household. After nearly 2,000 years of continuous and successful occupation, a period during which the city grew, evolved, and supported dozens of generations, the people of Catalhoyuk made a strange and momentous decision. They left. Around 5700 BC, the site was systematically and peacefully abandoned. The archaeological record of this abandonment is one of the great mysteries of the city. There are absolutely no signs of a catastrophic event that would have forced the population to flee. There are no layers of ash to suggest a great fire, no evidence of widespread disease in the skeletal remains, and crucially, no signs of warfare or conquest. The walls were not breached, and there are no weapon-related injuries on the bodies of the last inhabitants. This was not a city that was destroyed. It was a city that was deliberately and carefully deserted. The process of abandonment appears to have been a planned and orderly one. The final inhabitants of the houses seem to have performed a closing ritual. They cleaned their homes one last time, sometimes replastering the walls, and then they filled the entire house with clean soil before leaving. They were not just walking away from their homes. They were ceremonially burying them, respectfully closing the final chapter on a dwelling that had housed their ancestors for centuries. They took their valuable, portable possessions with them, their tools, their ornaments, and their personal items. But they left the city itself behind, a ghost town of buried houses that would remain undisturbed for nearly 8,000 years. The disappearance of the people of Catalhoyuk is a profound puzzle. Why would a society that had flourished in one spot for 2 millennia, a civilization that had invested so much labor and cultural energy into building this extraordinary city, simply decide to walk away? The verdict on Catalhoyuk's disappearance, in the absence of any evidence of a single catastrophic event, points towards a more complex and gradual process, a combination of environmental pressure and social change. The most widely accepted theory is that the abandonment was driven by long-term environmental degradation. The people of Catalhoyuk were farmers and pastoralists. They cultivated crops like wheat and barley and herded sheep and goats. An urban population of 8,000 people would have placed an immense and sustained pressure on the local environment. They would have needed vast quantities of wood for their ladders, their roof beams, and the fuel for their hearths, which would have led to widespread deforestation in the surrounding area. Their flocks of sheep and goats would have required extensive grazing land, which could have led to overgrazing and soil erosion. Furthermore, their agricultural practices, sustained over 2,000 years, may have gradually exhausted the fertility of the soil. All of this would have been exacerbated by a shifting climate. Paleoclimatological data from the region indicates that the climate in central Anatolia was becoming progressively drier during the period of Catalhoyuk's abandonment. This increasing aridity, combined with the self-inflicted damage to the local ecosystem, could have made life in the city increasingly unsustainable. The crop yields would have diminished, the grazing lands would have withered, and the sources of wood and water would have become more distant. Life in the great city, once a symbol of security and prosperity, may have become a struggle for survival. This growing environmental stress was likely coupled with social and cultural shifts. A society that is under pressure is often a society in flux. The old social structures and religious beliefs that had held the community together for so long may have begun to break down. New leaders or new religious ideas may have emerged, proposing a radical solution to their problems. A planned migration, a collective decision to abandon the ancestral home, and to found a new settlement in a more fertile and promising location. The careful ritualistic burial of the houses could be seen as part of this planned move, a way of respectfully leaving the world of the ancestors behind while looking towards a new future. The disappearance of Catalhoyuk, therefore, was likely not a mystery to the people who lived it. It was a rational and deliberate choice, a proactive response to a combination of environmental and social pressures that had made their old way of life no longer viable. The story of this great, lost city is a powerful and ancient lesson in the complex and often fragile relationship between human societies and the environment upon which they depend. A 9,000-year-old reminder that even the most innovative and successful civilizations can be forced to move on when the world around them changes. In the vast and intricate history of global trade, certain commodities have held a power that transcends mere economic value. For millennia, pearls, with their subtle luster and ethereal beauty, were among the most coveted of these treasures. They were symbols of wealth, status, and divine purity, prized by Roman aristocrats, Persian kings, and Indian maharajas alike. Long before the discovery of oil, the warm, shallow waters of the Arabian Gulf were the world's primary source for these precious gems, and the coastal communities of the region built their fortunes on the dangerous and demanding labor of pearling. For centuries, ancient texts and later Islamic geographical works spoke of a semi-legendary city in this region, a place called Tuam, which was renowned as the capital of this lucrative trade. Its wealth was said to be fabulous, its influence far-reaching, and then at the height of its power in the 6th century AD, it simply vanished from the historical record, its location lost, its story forgotten. It was not until the 21st century that archaeologists, excavating on the remote Sania Island in the modern United Arab Emirates, would uncover the sprawling ruins of this lost metropolis and solve the mystery of its sudden and catastrophic disappearance. The city that archaeologists have unearthed on Sania Island was a true metropolis for its time, a bustling and sophisticated urban center that served as the primary hub for the entire Gulf pearl trade. At its peak in the pre-Islamic era, Tuam was a thriving port, a cosmopolitan city whose strategic location made it a critical node in the vast network of trade routes that connected the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean world. The archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of a wealthy and well-organized society. The city was densely populated, with the complex layout of residential quarters, public buildings, and, crucially, a large fortified structure that likely served as the administrative and defensive heart of the city. The sheer scale of the settlement, and the evidence of its far-reaching international connections in the form of imported pottery, glassware, and coins from as far away as the Byzantine Empire, all testify to its immense economic importance. The engine of this wealth was the pearl trade, an industry that the people of Tuam had mastered on an industrial scale, as evidenced by the colossal mounds of discarded oyster shells that still line the shores of the ancient city. The disappearance of such a powerful and prosperous city from the historical record has long been a profound puzzle. Cities can decline and be abandoned for many reasons. They can be conquered and destroyed in war, their trade routes can shift and make them economically obsolete, or they can be victims of long-term environmental change like drought or rising sea levels. The archaeological evidence at Tuam, however, did not fit neatly into any of these conventional scenarios. The final layer of occupation at the site did not show the signs of a slow, gradual decline. The city was not slowly abandoned over generations, with its population dwindling and its buildings falling into disrepair. Instead, the evidence pointed to a sudden, abrupt, and catastrophic end. In the excavated houses, archaeologists found scenes of everyday life that seemed to be frozen in time. Usable tools were found dropped on the floors, cooking pots were left on their hearths, and personal items that would have been valuable to a population leaving in an orderly fashion were left behind. This is the archaeological signature of a rapid and unplanned abandonment, a moment when the normal routines of life came to a sudden and complete halt. Crucially, there were no signs of a violent conquest. There was no widespread layer of ash to suggest the city had been burned, no evidence of smashed walls from a siege, and no unusual concentration of weapons. The city was not sacked by an enemy army. It had simply died. The most chilling clue to the city's fate was the discovery of a unique burial site, a mass grave located just outside the main residential area. This was not a typical cemetery with orderly, individual burials. It was a pit containing numerous bodies that had been interred together in a hasty and disordered manner, with no grave goods and little ceremony. This is the unmistakable sign of a mass casualty event, a moment when the death rate was so high that the community's traditional, respectful burial rites completely broke down. The living, overwhelmed by the sheer number of the dead and likely weakened themselves, were forced to resort to the most basic and pragmatic solution: the rapid disposal of corpses in a communal grave. The city of Tuam had clearly been struck by a sudden and devastating event that had killed a huge portion of its population in a very short period of time. The verdict on what happened to Tuam, the solution to the mystery of its sudden disappearance, came not from the study of its architecture or its pottery, but from the microscopic analysis of the bones of its last inhabitants. In a remarkable piece of scientific detective work, a team of bioarchaeologists extracted tiny fragments of ancient DNA from the teeth of the skeletons found within the mass grave. They were searching for the genetic fingerprint of a specific and deadly killer. Their analysis yielded a definitive and tragic result. The DNA of the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the pathogen that causes the bubonic plague, was present in the remains. The smoking gun had been found. The great pearl trading metropolis of Tuam had not been destroyed by an army or a natural disaster. It had been a victim of one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, the Justinian Plague. The Justinian Plague, which erupted in the Byzantine Empire in 541 AD, was the first great pandemic of bubonic plague in recorded history. It was a catastrophe of almost unimaginable proportions, a biological holocaust that is estimated to have killed tens of millions of people, perhaps a third of the population of the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world. The plague spread with terrifying efficiency along the very same trade routes that had connected the ancient world and fostered its prosperity. It was carried by fleas on the black rats that were unwitting passengers on every merchant ship and in every caravan. A bustling international port city like Tuam, with its constant traffic of ships from the plague-ridden ports of the Byzantine and Persian empires, was not just a potential target, it was a demographic powder keg waiting for a spark. The arrival of a single infected ship in Tuam's harbor would have been all it took. The rats would have come ashore, and the disease would have spread rapidly through the dense, urban population. The plague would have been a terrifying and utterly incomprehensible event for the people of Tuam. They would have had no concept of germ theory, no understanding of how the disease was spreading. They would have only seen its horrific effects: the sudden onset of fever, the agonizingly painful swellings or buboes, and the swift, almost certain death that followed. The social fabric of the city would have unraveled with terrifying speed. The intricate economic machine of the pearl trade would have ground to a halt. The skilled divers, the sailors, and the merchants who were the lifeblood of the city would have been among the first to die, and with them, the specialized knowledge that had sustained the city for centuries. The archaeological evidence of the mass grave and the sudden abandonment of the city now made perfect tragic sense. The city was not conquered. It was consumed from within by an invisible enemy. The few survivors, if there were any, would have been faced with a horrifying reality. Their city was a ghost town, their families were dead, their livelihood was destroyed, and their home was now a place of unimaginable death and sorrow. Their only logical choice would have been to flee, to abandon the cursed site forever, leaving the great city to be slowly reclaimed by the wind and the sand. The story of Tuam is a powerful and sobering testament to the fragility of even the most prosperous societies. The very trade routes that were the source of its immense wealth were also the conduits of its utter destruction, a tragic irony that serves as a powerful lesson from the deep past. In the long and often turbulent history of Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, that is now modern-day Iraq, the story of the Akkadian Empire holds a place of unique and legendary significance. Flourishing for a brief but brilliant period of about 150 years, from roughly 2334 to 2154 BC, Akkad was not just another powerful city-state. It was, by most historical definitions, the world's first true empire. Under the leadership of its visionary and formidable founder, Sargon the Great, the city of Akkad rose from obscurity to conquer and unify the disparate Sumerian city-states of southern Mesopotamia, and to extend its rule over a vast territory, creating a multi-ethnic, centrally administered state of unprecedented scale and complexity. The Akkadian Empire was a milestone in human political evolution, a template for all the empires that would follow. Its capital, the city of Akkad itself, was said to be a place of immense wealth and power, the glorious center of this new world order. Yet, for all its fame and historical importance, the city of Akkad is a ghost. Despite being mentioned in hundreds of cuneiform texts as a great and powerful capital, its physical ruins have never been found. Its location remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Near Eastern archaeology. The story of Akkad's disappearance is therefore a double mystery: the puzzle of a lost city, and the deeper, more profound question of what caused its powerful empire to suddenly and catastrophically collapse. The city of Akkad, or Agade as it was known in the Akkadian language, was the personal creation of its founder, Sargon. Sargon's own origin story is the stuff of legend, bearing a striking resemblance to the later story of Moses. He was said to have been a man of humble birth, who was placed in a reed basket and set adrift on the Euphrates River, only to be found and raised by a gardener. Through his own skill and ambition, he rose to become the cupbearer to the king of Kish, a major Sumerian city. From this position he launched a series of brilliant military campaigns, conquering the established Sumerian cities one by one and forging them into a single, unified state under his rule. To consolidate his power and to create a new center for his empire, he founded a new capital city, Akkad. The city's location was a strategic choice, situated in northern Mesopotamia, near the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a position that allowed it to control the major trade routes of the region. Under Sargon and his successors, particularly his grandson Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire became a powerful and prosperous state. They standardized weights and measures, established a postal system, and created a standing army to maintain control over their vast territory, which stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Akkadian became the lingua franca of the ancient Near East, the language of diplomacy and trade. The art of the Akkadian period is renowned for its new sense of realism and dynamism, a departure from the more static, formal style of the Sumerians. The famous victory stele of Naram-Sin, which depicts the king as a divine, godlike figure triumphing over his enemies, is a masterpiece of political propaganda and artistic skill. The city of Akkad itself, as the capital of this great empire, would have been a magnificent urban center, with grand palaces, imposing temples dedicated to the Akkadian gods like Ishtar, and bustling markets filled with goods from across the known world. It was for a time the center of the universe. The disappearance of such a major city from the archaeological record is deeply perplexing. We know it existed. We have thousands of cuneiform tablets from other Mesopotamian cities that refer to it, that record trade with it, and that speak of its kings and its power. Yet, despite more than a century of intensive archaeological exploration in Iraq, the physical remains of Akkad have never been definitively identified. Numerous sites have been proposed, but none have yielded the conclusive evidence such as a royal archive or a monumental inscription bearing the city's name that would confirm its identity. This has led to the frustrating situation where we know a great deal about the empire, but almost nothing about its capital. The reasons for this are likely a combination of geographical and historical factors. The shifting courses of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers over the past 4,000 years may have either buried the city under thick layers of alluvial silt or washed its remains away entirely. It is also possible that its ruins lie beneath a modern city, like Baghdad, making excavation impossible. Whatever the reason, the lost city of Akkad remains one of archaeology's most sought-after and elusive prizes. Even more mysterious than the location of the city, however, is the reason for its sudden and catastrophic collapse. After about a century and a half of unparalleled power, the Akkadian Empire disintegrated with astonishing speed. The historical record becomes confused and chaotic. The great centralized state broke apart, and Mesopotamia descended into a dark age, a period of political fragmentation, social unrest, and economic decline that would last for several decades. Later Mesopotamian literary texts, such as The Curse of Akkad, looked back on this event with a sense of religious awe and terror. This famous poem tells a mythological story in which the king Naram-Sin, in his arrogance, angers the gods by sacking the holy temple of the god, Enlil, in the city of Nippur. In response, the gods unleash their fury upon Akkad, sending down the Gutians, a fierce tribe from the Zagros Mountains, to destroy the city and laying a curse upon the land, a curse of famine and desolation. For a long time, this mythological explanation, combined with historical evidence of Gutian invasions, was the accepted reason for Akkad's fall. The empire was believed to have been brought down by internal rebellion and external invasion. The verdict on what really happened to Akkad and its empire, however, has come not from the study of ancient texts or the discovery of new ruins, but from an entirely different and unexpected field of science: paleoclimatology. In recent decades, scientists have developed powerful techniques to reconstruct the climate of the deep past with incredible precision. By analyzing the chemical composition of ice cores drilled in Greenland and the Himalayas, the layers of sediment in the Gulf of Oman, and the soil composition of archaeological sites across the Middle East, a new and dramatic picture has emerged. The data from all of these independent sources points to a single stark conclusion: around 2200 BC, at the exact time of the Akkadian Empire's collapse, the entire Near East was struck by a sudden, severe, and prolonged period of aridification. This was not a normal cyclical drought. It was a massive, abrupt climate change event that lasted for nearly 3 centuries. This 4.2 kilo-year event, as it is now known, had a devastating impact on the agricultural societies of the time. The monsoon rains that fed the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers failed, leading to a dramatic reduction in river flow. The once fertile plains of northern Mesopotamia, the breadbasket of the Akkadian Empire, were transformed into a dust bowl. Archaeological excavations at sites from this period confirm the story told by the climate data. They show a thick layer of wind-blown sand and dust, indicative of a landscape that had lost its vegetation. They also show the widespread abandonment of cities and farming villages across the entire region. The people were fleeing a land that could no longer support them. This new scientific evidence provides a powerful and far more convincing explanation for the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. Sargon and his successors had built their empire on the foundation of a highly productive agricultural system in northern Mesopotamia. The surplus grain produced in this region fed their armies, supported their bureaucracy, and was the basis of their wealth. The sudden onset of a megadrought would have completely shattered this foundation. The crop failures would have been catastrophic and widespread, leading to a massive famine. A starving population is a desperate and rebellious population. The centralized authority of the Akkadian kings would have collapsed as they became unable to feed their people and their armies. The empire would have been torn apart by internal revolts, as different regions fought for the dwindling resources of food and water. The curse of Akkad, which blamed the fall on the impiety of the king, can now be reinterpreted as a mythologized memory of a real environmental catastrophe. The Gutian invasions were likely not the cause of the collapse, but a consequence of it. The Gutians and other groups were probably climate refugees themselves, driven from their highland homes by the same drought, who then moved into the collapsing and chaotic lowlands. The story of the lost city of Akkad and its vanished empire is therefore a powerful and deeply relevant cautionary tale. It is a story of a great and innovative civilization, the world's first empire, that was brought down not by a rival army, but by the invisible and inexorable force of climate change. Their political and military power, for all its might, was ultimately dependent on the stability of the environment. When the climate shifted, their entire complex society unraveled with astonishing speed. The mystery of Akkad's disappearance is a testament to the fact that even the greatest empires are fragile, and it serves as a sobering, for thousand-year-old warning about the profound and often devastating consequences that can follow when the delicate balance between human civilization and the natural world is broken. The lost city remains hidden, but the reason for its loss is now becoming chillingly clear. In the heartland of North America, on the vast fertile floodplain of the Mississippi River, just a few miles east of the modern city of St. Louis, Missouri, lie the silent, enigmatic remnants of a city that was, for its time, a true American metropolis. This is the site of Cahokia, the largest and most sophisticated prehistoric city north of the great civilizations of Mexico. Flourishing for over 3 centuries, from approximately 1050 to 1350 AD, Cahokia was the political, religious, and economic center of a vast and influential culture, known to archaeologists as the Mississippian. At its peak, it was a city of towering earthen mounds, sprawling plazas, and a population that dwarfed that of contemporary London. It was, without question, the greatest achievement of the indigenous peoples of North America, a testament to their capacity for large-scale social organization, monumental architecture, and complex cultural expression. Yet, for all its power and influence, the story of Cahokia is a story of a sudden, spectacular rise and an equally swift and mysterious decline. By the year 1350, the great city was completely abandoned, its grand plazas empty, its monumental mounds left to be slowly reclaimed by the forest. The disappearance of Cahokia is one of the most profound and enduring mysteries in North American archaeology, a puzzle that has led to a host of competing theories, from environmental collapse and warfare to disease and political revolution. The city of Cahokia, at its zenith around 1100 AD, was a sight to behold. It covered an area of nearly 6 square miles and had a core urban population estimated to be between 10,000 and 20,000 people, with an even larger population living in the surrounding satellite towns and farming villages. The city was a masterpiece of urban planning, centered on a series of vast, open plazas that were used for public ceremonies, political gatherings, and a popular and ritually important game known as Chunky. The most striking feature of the city's landscape, however, was its monumental architecture, a collection of over 120 man-made earthen mounds. These were not simple heaps of dirt. They were complex, engineered structures, built by hand, basketful by basketful, over a period of many generations. The mounds came in various shapes and sizes, including conical mounds, which were likely used for burials, and long ridgetop mounds, whose function is still debated. The most common and most impressive were the large, flat-topped platform mounds. These served as the foundations for the most important buildings in the city: the temples, the council houses, and the residences of the ruling elite. By placing their most important structures on top of these massive earthen platforms, the leaders of Cahokia were physically and symbolically elevating themselves above the common populace, a clear and powerful statement of their social and political authority. The undisputed center of the entire city was the largest of these platform mounds, a colossal structure now known as Monk's Mound. It is the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Americas, a 4-terraced pyramid of earth that stands over 100 feet, 30 meters, tall and covers an area of 14 acres at its base. It is a man-made mountain, built from an estimated 22 million cubic feet of earth. Atop its highest terrace would have stood a massive wooden building, perhaps 5,000 square feet in size, which was likely the residence of the paramount chief of Cahokia, a ruler who held both immense political power and a sacred, divine status. From the summit of Monk's Mound, this ruler would have had a commanding view of his entire city and the surrounding floodplain, a daily reminder of his power and his central place in the cosmos. The disappearance of such a large and powerful city is the central mystery of Cahokia. The archaeological record shows that after centuries of growth and stability, something went profoundly wrong. Beginning around the year 1200, the city entered a period of decline. The population began to shrink, and the construction of new mounds and public works ceased. By 1350, the site was almost completely deserted. What could have caused such a complete and relatively rapid societal collapse? There is no single, simple answer, and the archaeological evidence paints a complex picture of a society facing a convergence of multiple crises. Unlike some other lost cities, there is no evidence of a single catastrophic event like a volcanic eruption or a devastating earthquake that destroyed the city in a single blow. Nor is there clear and unambiguous evidence of a successful foreign invasion. The story of Cahokia's abandonment is a more nuanced and complex tale of a society that, for a variety of reasons, became unsustainable. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the city's decline is the late-stage construction of a massive defensive palisade, or stockade wall, around the central ceremonial precinct that included Monk's Mound. This was a formidable defensive structure, 2 miles in length, built from thousands of large wooden logs and featuring a series of watchtowers. The wall was rebuilt at least 3 times, suggesting a sustained and growing threat. The construction of such a massive defensive wall is a clear sign of a society under stress. It indicates that the leaders of Cahokia were no longer secure in their power, but were facing a significant threat, either from external enemies or from internal rebellion among their own populace. The wall is a silent testament to a golden age that had passed, a symbol of a city that had turned from an open, confident center of power into a fortified, defensive bastion. The verdict on what happened to Cahokia, in the absence of a single clear cause, is that the city was likely the victim of a systems collapse, a situation where multiple interconnected factors created a perfect storm of crises that the society was unable to overcome. The most prominent theory points to a combination of environmental degradation and climate change. The construction of the city and the support of its large population had a massive impact on the local environment. The thousands of logs needed for the defensive palisade and the hundreds of buildings would have required the clear-cutting of vast tracts of forest in the surrounding area. This widespread deforestation would have had severe consequences, leading to increased soil erosion and more frequent and destructive flooding on the Mississippi floodplain where the city's agricultural fields were located. The Cahokians were farmers, and their society was built on the successful cultivation of maize, corn. Their entire food supply, and therefore their social and political stability, was dependent on reliable harvests. The archaeological evidence suggests that after centuries of intensive farming, the fertility of the local soil may have been depleted. This was likely exacerbated by a significant shift in the regional climate. Paleoclimatological data indicates that the period of Cahokia's decline coincided with the beginning of the Little Ice Age, a global climatic cooling that led to shorter growing seasons and less predictable rainfall in North America. A series of prolonged droughts or major floods, coming at a time when the local environment was already stressed, could have led to catastrophic crop failures and widespread famine. A starving population is an unstable population, and this would have severely undermined the authority of the paramount chief, whose power was likely based on his perceived ability to mediate with the gods and ensure the fertility of the land. This environmental and agricultural crisis would have been amplified by a host of related social and political problems. A large, dense, urban population, particularly one suffering from malnutrition, would have been highly vulnerable to the spread of infectious diseases. While there is no direct evidence of a single, devastating epidemic, poor sanitation and crowded living conditions could have led to chronic problems with diseases like tuberculosis, which has been found in some of the skeletal remains. The growing instability, fueled by hunger and disease, would have led to political fragmentation and social strife. The defensive palisade may have been built not just to defend against outside enemies, but to protect the ruling elite from their own starving and rebellious populace. As the central authority of the paramount chief in Cahokia weakened, The various satellite towns and subject peoples that made up the wider Mississippian world would have begun to break away. The flow of tribute food and luxury goods that had sustained the capital would have ceased. People would have begun to vote with their feet, abandoning the failing city and migrating to smaller, more sustainable settlements elsewhere. The collapse was likely not a single dramatic event, but a gradual and irreversible process of unraveling. As the population declined, the ability to maintain the city's massive public works and to perform the great communal rituals that held the society together would have diminished, leading to a further crisis of faith and a loss of social cohesion. The great city, once the vibrant center of its world, slowly and inexorably fell apart. In conclusion, the story of the lost city of Cahokia is a powerful and complex cautionary tale. It is a story of a great and innovative indigenous civilization that rose to incredible heights, creating a city and a culture of remarkable sophistication. But it is also a story of the inherent fragility of complex societies. The very factors that contributed to Cahokia's rise, its large, concentrated population and its intensive agricultural system, also contain the seeds of its downfall. The city's inhabitants, through a combination of their own environmental impact and their vulnerability to larger climatic forces, created a system that was ultimately unsustainable. The abandonment of Cahokia was not a mystery to the people who left. It was a rational response to a world that was no longer working for them. The silent, grassy mounds that remain today are more than just a puzzle for archaeologists. They are a profound and timeless reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition, social complexity, and the enduring power of the natural world. On the rugged, windswept coast of the Orkney Islands, a remote archipelago off the northern tip of Scotland, lies a prehistoric village of such extraordinary preservation that it has been called the Scottish Pompeii. This is Skara Brae, a small Neolithic settlement that was occupied for approximately 600 years, from roughly 3100 to 2500 BC. What makes Skara Brae so remarkable is not its size or its grandeur, but its intimate and almost perfectly preserved state. For over 4 millennia, the entire village lay buried beneath a protective blanket of sand, a time capsule that has provided an unparalleled window into the daily lives, the homes, and the minds of a Stone Age community. The village was not destroyed by a sudden, violent catastrophe, but was eventually abandoned by its inhabitants. The story of Skara Brae's disappearance is a subtle and fascinating mystery, a tale of a resilient and ingenious people who built a remarkable home for themselves on the edge of the world, and the powerful environmental forces that ultimately led them to walk away, leaving their stone furniture and their secrets behind. The city, or more accurately, the village of Skara Brae, is a masterpiece of Neolithic architecture and a testament to the incredible ingenuity of its builders. The entire settlement is a tight-knit cluster of 8 semi-subterranean houses, connected by a series of low, covered passageways. The houses were dug into the earth and then built up with walls of carefully selected, flat-sided stones, a technique known as dry stone construction, which uses no mortar. This semi-subterranean design was a brilliant adaptation to the harsh, treeless environment of Orkney. The earth and the thick stone walls would have provided excellent insulation, protecting the inhabitants from the fierce Atlantic winds and the cold of the northern winters. The low, narrow passageways that linked the houses would have allowed the villagers to move between their homes without having to expose themselves to the elements during storms. The entire village was a single, integrated architectural unit, a snug and protected warren designed for communal living in a challenging landscape. The most astonishing feature of Skara Brae, however, is the state of preservation of its interiors. Because the Orkney Islands have very few trees, the inhabitants of Skara Brae built almost everything out of the one resource they had in abundance: stone. The houses of Skara Brae are famous for their intact, stone-built furniture, which has survived for 5,000 years. In the center of each single-room dwelling is a large, square stone hearth for the fire that would have been the heart of the home, providing heat, light, and a place for cooking. Flanking the hearth built into the walls are two stone box beds, which would have been filled with heather and animal skins to create warm and comfortable sleeping places. Perhaps the most remarkable piece of furniture is the stone dresser, a set of shelves built against the wall opposite the entrance. It is believed that this dresser was used to display the family's most important and prestigious possessions, a focal point for the identity of the household. Each house also had small, stone-lined tanks set into the floor, which may have been used for storing live seafood like limpets, keeping them fresh until they were needed. The village even had a sophisticated drainage system, with drains running beneath the houses to carry away waste, a form of primitive indoor plumbing. The lives of the people who inhabited this stone village were a blend of farming, herding, and a deep reliance on the sea. The archaeological evidence, in the form of animal bones and ancient pollen, shows that they were pastoralists, raising cattle and sheep. They were also farmers, cultivating early forms of barley. The immense rubbish heaps or middens that surround the village are a treasure trove of information about their diet. They contain vast quantities of shells from seafood like limpets and oysters, as well as the bones of fish, seabirds, and seals. They were a people who were intimately connected to the sea, drawing a significant portion of their sustenance from its bounty. They were also skilled craftspeople, producing distinctive, grooved pottery and a variety of tools and ornaments from bone and stone. Enigmatic carved stone balls, whose purpose is still debated, have also been found at the site, suggesting a complex ritual or social life. Skara Brae provides a uniquely complete and intimate portrait of a thriving and self-sufficient Neolithic community, a people who had successfully and ingeniously adapted to life on the very edge of the ancient world. The disappearance of this vibrant and long-lived community is a subtle and compelling mystery. Around 2500 BC, after some 600 years of continuous occupation, the village of Skara Brae was abandoned. For a long time, the popular theory, fueled by the village's remarkable state of preservation, was that the abandonment had been a sudden, catastrophic event. The story told was of a single, terrible storm that had swept in from the Atlantic, forcing the inhabitants to flee for their lives, leaving everything behind as the village was rapidly buried by a massive sand dune. This dramatic Pompeii theory was appealing, because it explained the frozen-in-time quality of the site. However, modern archaeological analysis has largely disproven this catastrophic scenario. A careful examination of the site reveals that the abandonment was not a panicked, instantaneous flight. While some valuable items, such as a cache of beads and pendants, were seemingly left behind, the houses were largely cleared of their most important portable possessions. The final layers of occupation also show a buildup of sand and refuse within the houses, suggesting that the site may have been becoming increasingly difficult to live in towards the end of its life. The abandonment of Skara Brae was not a single dramatic event, but a more gradual, though likely planned, process. The final inhabitants did not flee in terror. They made a conscious and collective decision to leave their ancestral home. The question, therefore, is why? The verdict on Skara Brae's disappearance, in the absence of any evidence for warfare or sudden disaster, points overwhelmingly to the powerful and inexorable force of environmental change. The most widely accepted theory is that the abandonment was the result of a long-term climatic shift, combined with the ever-present process of coastal erosion. Paleoclimatological data from across northern Europe indicates that around 2500 BC, the climate was entering a colder and wetter phase. This would have made life in the already challenging environment of Orkney even more difficult. The growing seasons for their barley crops would have become shorter and less reliable, and the colder, stormier weather would have placed greater stress on both the human and animal populations. This climatic shift was likely accompanied by a significant change in the local landscape. Skara Brae is located right on the edge of the Bay of Scail, a beautiful but exposed sandy bay. When the village was first built, it was likely situated in a more protected position, further inland from the sea, nestled in a landscape of grassy dunes. However, over the 600 years of its occupation, the relentless action of the Atlantic waves and winds would have been constantly reshaping the coastline. The process of coastal erosion would have been slowly but surely eating away at the land, bringing the sea ever closer to the village. The encroaching sand dunes, driven by the strong winds, would have become a constant problem, threatening to engulf the low-lying houses and their connecting passageways. The combination of a deteriorating climate and an increasingly unstable and threatening coastal environment would have made life at Skara Brae progressively more difficult and precarious. The villagers would have found themselves in a constant battle against the elements, their homes threatened by the encroaching sand and their food supply threatened by the changing climate. At some point, the community likely reached a tipping point. The leaders or the collective community would have made the rational and pragmatic decision that their current location was no longer sustainable. The effort required to maintain the village in the face of these environmental pressures had become too great. Their best option for survival was to relocate, to find a new, more sheltered and stable location to build their homes and plant their fields. The abandonment in this scenario would have been a planned and orderly withdrawal. The community would have decided to leave together, likely over the course of a single season or generation. They would have packed up their most essential and valuable possessions, their stone axes, their pottery, their herds of livestock, and moved to a new site, perhaps just a few miles inland. The things they left behind, like the stone furniture which was part of the houses themselves, and a few items that were perhaps lost or deliberately left as offerings, are the silent witnesses to this final departure. The sand that had been their enemy in the final years of the village's life became its ultimate preserver. After the last inhabitants had left, the sand dunes, no longer held at bay by human effort, moved in and completely buried the village, entombing it in a protective cocoon that would keep its secrets safe for the next 5,000 years. The story of the lost village of Skara Brae is therefore not a tale of a sudden, tragic end, but a more poignant and relatable story of a community making a difficult but necessary choice in the face of a changing world. It is a powerful prehistoric example of a community of climate refugees. Their disappearance is a testament to the fact that even the most ingenious and resilient societies are ultimately subject to the power of the natural world. The people of Skara Brae had thrived for centuries by adapting brilliantly to their environment, but when that environment changed in a fundamental way, their only remaining adaptation was to leave. The perfectly preserved stone houses and their contents are a unique and precious gift from the past, a silent and intimate monument to a lost way of life, and a timeless story of the enduring and often challenging relationship between human communities and the ever-changing face of the planet. In the sun-scorched and strategically vital landscape of the Sinai Peninsula, where the stark desert mountains slope down to the azure waters of the Red Sea, there sits a small rocky islet known as Pharaoh's Island. Today, its silhouette is defined by the impressive, beautifully restored battlements of a medieval fortress, a legacy of the Crusaders and later the Mamluk sultans. For the thousands of tourists who visit each year, it is a picturesque monument to a bygone era of knights and conquerors. Yet, beneath the foundations of this well-preserved castle, and scattered in the clear waters of its natural harbor, lie the fragmented and much older clues to a far more legendary story, a tale that has captivated historians, theologians, and adventurers for millennia. This tiny granite outpost is now widely considered to be the most plausible location for the lost biblical port of Ezion-Geber, the home of King Solomon's great navy. For centuries, Ezion-Geber was little more than a name in the pages of the Old Testament, a semi-mythical seaport from which the fleets of ancient Israel, guided by Phoenician masters of the sea, embarked on epic, 3-year voyages to the fabled treasure-laden land of Ophir. The story of this vanished city is a fascinating and complex investigation, a quest to find the historical reality behind a biblical legend, and a profound lesson in how the fortunes of even the greatest ports are inextricably tied to the shifting, treacherous tides of geopolitics. The city of Ezion-Geber first emerges in the biblical narrative as a humble stopping point, one of the many campsites for the Israelite tribes during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness after their exodus from Egypt. It is a simple geographical marker in the great national epic of Israel's formation. However, it is several centuries later, during the 10th century BC, in the golden age of the Israelite United Monarchy, that the port is elevated from a mere location to a place of legendary importance. This transformation is entirely the work of one of the Bible's most iconic and complex figures, King Solomon, the son of King David. The biblical account portrays Solomon's reign as a period of unprecedented peace, prosperity, and international prestige. He was a ruler renowned not for his military conquests, but for his divine wisdom, his vast wealth, and his ambitious and magnificent building projects, most notably the construction of the First Temple in Jerusalem. It is within this context of immense ambition and expanding horizons that the Bible describes one of Solomon's most revolutionary undertakings, the creation of a Red Sea fleet. The first book of Kings records the event with a clear and specific detail. King Solomon also built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. This was a truly radical and visionary project. The ancient Israelites were, by tradition and geography, a highland people, a nation of shepherds and farmers with little to no maritime experience. Their cultural and economic life was centered on the hills of Judea and Samaria, far from the great sea lanes of the Mediterranean. Solomon's decision to build a major naval base on the distant and difficult-to-access Gulf of Aqaba was a strategic masterstroke, a bold move to shatter his nation's landlocked limitations and to open up a new, direct, and incredibly lucrative trade route to the exotic markets of the South and East. To achieve this audacious goal, Solomon, the wise diplomat, understood that he needed to forge a strategic alliance. He turned to the one power in the ancient Near East that possessed the knowledge he lacked, the Phoenicians. He formed a close partnership with Hiram I, the powerful and wealthy king of the Phoenician city-state of Tyre. The Phoenicians, based in the coastal cities of modern-day Lebanon, were the undisputed masters of the ancient seas. They were the most skilled shipbuilders, the most experienced sailors, and the most adventurous merchants of their time. Their trade network already dominated the entire Mediterranean, and their ships were renowned for their sturdiness and seaworthiness. The Bible describes a grand joint venture, a fusion of Israelite resources and Phoenician expertise, and Hiram sent with the fleet his servants, sailors who knew the sea, along with the servants of Solomon. This partnership was the key to the entire enterprise. Solomon provided the political will, the access to the Red Sea, and likely the raw materials and labor, while Hiram provided the irreplaceable technical know-how, shipwrights to oversee the construction of the fleet and the expert captains and navigators to guide the voyages. From this newly established port of Ezion-Geber, the joint Israelite-Phoenician fleet embarked on a series of extraordinary and highly profitable voyages to a mysterious and fabulously wealthy land known as Ophir. The precise location of Ophir is one of the great, unsolved mysteries of biblical geography, a puzzle that has tantalized scholars for centuries. The Bible describes it as a land of immense and exotic riches, a source of incredible quantities of gold, silver, ivory, precious gemstones, rare woods like sandalwood, referred to as almagwood, and exotic animals like apes and peacocks. The voyages were epic undertakings, lasting a full 3 years from departure to return, suggesting a destination that was very far from the Red Sea. Various theories have been proposed for the location of Ophir, ranging from the southern Arabian Peninsula, modern-day Yemen or Oman, to the Horn of Africa, modern-day Somalia or Ethiopia, or even as far afield as the western coast of India. Regardless of its exact location, the biblical account is emphatic about the staggering wealth that these voyages brought back to Solomon's kingdom. On a single expedition, the fleet is said to have returned with 420 talents of gold. A talent was a unit of weight, and while its exact measure varied, this would have amounted to many tons of gold. an almost unimaginable fortune in the ancient world. This immense influx of wealth from the south, combined with the profits from his control of the overland trade routes to the north, is presented as the foundation of Solomon's legendary splendor. It was this trade that funded the construction of his magnificent temple and palace in Jerusalem, and allowed him to overlay his buildings with gold, and to create his famous golden shields and ivory throne. The story of Eziongeber and the voyages to Ophir, therefore, is not just a tale of exploration. It is the biblical explanation for the Golden Age of Israel, a time when a small hill kingdom briefly became a major player on the international stage, its power and prestige built upon a foundation of maritime trade and global ambition. The complete disappearance of such a historically significant and economically vital port from the archaeological map has long been a profound puzzle for historians and biblical scholars. The Bible provides a clear, if general, geographical marker. On the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. This places the search in the northern Gulf of Aqaba, a relatively small and well-defined area. For much of the 20th century, the search for Eziongeber was dominated by the work of the influential American rabbi and archaeologist, Nelson Glueck. In the 1930s, Glueck conducted extensive surveys in the region and began excavations at a site known as Tel El Khalife, a low archaeological mound situated in modern Jordan, between the present-day cities of Aqaba and Eilat. Glueck's excavations at Tel El Khalife were, at first, a spectacular success. He unearthed a large, well-planned, and heavily fortified settlement, dating to the early Iron Age. The most significant discovery was a large mud brick building with a complex system of flues and air channels, which he confidently identified as a massive state-of-the-art copper smelter. This discovery seemed to fit the biblical narrative perfectly. Solomon was known not only for his gold trade, but also for his control over the rich copper mines in the nearby Araba Valley. Glueck announced to the world that he had found not only Solomon's great seaport, but also the industrial heart of his empire, the legendary King Solomon's mines. For decades, his identification was widely accepted and became a textbook example of archaeology, confirming the historical accuracy of the Bible. However, as archaeological methods and interpretations became more sophisticated, Glueck's confident conclusions began to unravel. Re-examination of the evidence from Tel El Khalife by later archaeologists in the 1960s and beyond painted a very different picture. The pottery and other artifacts from the main levels of the settlement were found to date primarily to the 8th century BC and later, a full 2 centuries after the time of Solomon. More damningly, Glueck's famous smelter was reinterpreted. The sophisticated system of flues was shown to be not for forcing air into a furnace, but for providing air circulation to keep the interior cool. The structure was not a high-tech industrial smelter, but a more mundane, though still impressive, fortified storehouse or granary. While Tel El Khalife was clearly an important ancient settlement, it was not the Solomonic port of Eziongeber. The search was back on. In recent decades, scholarly and archaeological attention has shifted decisively to another, more compelling candidate, Pharaoh's Island. This tiny granite island, located just a few hundred meters off the western coast of the Gulf of Aqaba in what are now Egyptian territorial waters, possesses the one crucial feature that Tel El Khalife lacks: a superb, naturally protected harbor. The Gulf of Aqaba is notorious for its strong, unpredictable winds, and the island creates 2 shelter bays that provide a safe and secure anchorage for ships, a rare and invaluable asset in this part of the Red Sea. This geographical advantage alone makes it a far more logical location for a major naval base than the exposed, sandy coastline of the mainland. Archaeological investigations, both on the island itself and in the surrounding waters, have produced a wealth of evidence to support this identification. Underwater surveys of the harbor have revealed the submerged remains of what appear to be ancient quays and jetties. More significantly, numerous stone anchors of a type consistent with those used in the early Iron Age, the time of Solomon, have been recovered from the harbor floor. On the island, excavations beneath the Crusader fortress have been limited, but have still managed to uncover pottery sherds and other artifacts that date to the 10th century BC, confirming that the site was occupied during the Solomonic era. While there is no smoking gun, no monumental inscription bearing the name Ezion-Geber, the combination of the perfect natural harbor, the strategic location, and the corroborating archaeological evidence makes Pharaoh's Island the strongest and most widely accepted candidate for the site of King Solomon's legendary lost port. The verdict on the disappearance of Ezion-Geber, therefore, is not a story of a city destroyed by a great catastrophe or swallowed by the sea. It is a more subtle, but no less definitive, story of a gradual decline driven by the inexorable and shifting tides of geopolitics in the ancient Near East. The golden age of the united Israelite monarchy under David and Solomon was a historical anomaly, a relatively brief and unique window of opportunity. This period in the 10th century BC was a time when the two great superpowers of the region, Egypt to the south and the various empires of Mesopotamia to the northeast, were both in a period of relative weakness and internal disarray. Egypt was in its politically fragmented third intermediate period, and the Neo-Assyrian Empire had not yet begun its relentless rise to power. This geopolitical power vacuum in the Levant allowed smaller, opportunistic kingdoms like the United Monarchy of Israel and its Phoenician allies to flourish, to assert their independence, and to take control of the lucrative trade routes that crisscrossed the region. Solomon's ability to build and maintain a naval base as far south as the Red Sea was entirely dependent on this fragile and temporary balance of power. His control over the land of Edom, the arid territory that his father David had conquered, was the essential land bridge that connected his kingdom to the Gulf of Aqaba. This golden age, however, did not last. Following Solomon's death around 930 BC, his powerful and prosperous kingdom famously fractured. A rebellion fueled by resentment over his heavy taxation and forced labor policies led to the division of the kingdom into two smaller, weaker states: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. This schism was a political and military disaster from which the Israelites would never fully recover. The two kingdoms were often rivals, sometimes even at war with each other, and their disunity made them vulnerable to the ambitions of their neighbors. The Bible itself provides the key to Ezion-Geber's decline. It records that during the reign of Solomon's successor in Judah, the Edomites, who had been a vassal state, successfully revolted and regained their independence. With the loss of Edom, the kingdom of Judah lost its direct control over the territory leading to the Red Sea. The vital overland caravan routes that supplied the port with timber, food, and trade goods were now in the hands of a hostile and independent power. Ezion-Geber, a remote and isolated outpost, was now completely cut off from its Israelite heartland. Maintaining and supplying the port, let alone a fleet of ships, would have become a logistical and military impossibility. The great southern trade route, the source of so much of Solomon's wealth, was effectively severed. The biblical record does mention one last, desperate attempt to revive the port's fortunes. Over a century later, during the reign of King Jehoshaphat of Judah in the 9th century BC, a brief period of renewed strength saw Judah reassert some measure of control over Edom. The allure of the legendary riches of Ophir was clearly still a powerful one. Jehoshaphat, in a clear attempt to emulate his great predecessor Solomon, attempted to rebuild a fleet at Ezion-Geber to once again sail for gold. The text, however, records that the venture ended in complete disaster. The ships were wrecked and were not able to go to Ophir. While the text does not specify the cause of the shipwreck, it could have been a storm, poor craftsmanship, or even sabotage. The failure is deeply symbolic. It marks the final definitive end of Israelite maritime ambitions on the Red Sea. The dream of a great southern trade route was over. The disappearance of Ezion-Geber from the historical narrative is, therefore, not a mystery of physical destruction, but one of political and economic obsolescence. The port did not vanish because it was burned by an enemy or sunk by an earthquake. It vanished because the specific and unique geopolitical conditions that had allowed it to flourish for a brief, brilliant period had ceased to exist. As the great empires of the Near East, particularly the formidable Neo-Assyrian Empire, rose to power in the centuries that followed, they came to dominate the region and its trade routes completely. The small kingdom of Judah was reduced to a vassal state, its foreign and economic policy largely dictated by the whims of the Assyrian emperor in far-off Nineveh. The grand, independent maritime ambitions of Solomon's era became a distant and unrecoverable memory, a story of a lost golden age to be told by future generations. The port itself on Pharaoh's Island likely continued to be used on a smaller scale by the Edomites, the Nabateans, and later powers, but its grand historical significance as the home of King Solomon's navy was lost. Over the centuries, its very location became a matter of scholarly debate, its story receding from history into the realm of legend. The quest to find Ezion-Geber is a powerful reminder that the fortunes of even the greatest cities are often tied to the fragile and unpredictable currents of politics, and that the loss of a city can be as much about the loss of power and purpose as it is about physical destruction. In the stark and hauntingly beautiful landscape of the eastern Anatolian plateau, right on the modern-day border between Turkey and Armenia, lie the spectacular ruins of a city that was once the vibrant and powerful capital of a great medieval kingdom. This is the ghost city of Ani, a place of such legendary magnificence that it was known as the City of 1001 Churches, and was rivaled in its time only by the likes of Constantinople, Cairo, and Baghdad. For over 3 centuries, Ani was the proud and prosperous capital of the Bagratid Armenian kingdom, a major center of commerce, culture, and religion that sat astride a crucial branch of the Great Silk Road. Its massive, double-walled fortifications, its magnificent cathedrals with their pioneering architectural designs, and its bustling palaces and marketplaces all spoke of a city at the height of its power and sophistication. Yet, today, Ani is a desolate and windswept ruin, its once glorious churches crumbling into the deep gorge that marks the border, its streets silent, its population long vanished. The story of Ani's disappearance is not a tale of a single sudden catastrophe, but a more complex and tragic narrative of a long, slow, and agonizing decline, a case study in how a great city can be brought to its knees by a fatal combination of natural disaster, military conquest, and, most decisively, the shifting and unforgiving currents of global economics. The city of Ani, at its zenith in the 10th and 11th centuries, was one of the great urban centers of the medieval world. Its rise to prominence was the result of its strategic and incredibly fortuitous location. The city is situated on a naturally defensible triangular plateau, protected on 2 sides by the deep gorge of the Akurian River, which now forms the international border. This location placed it directly on a major artery of the Silk Road, the legendary network of trade routes that connected China and the East with the Byzantine Empire and Europe. The wealth of the world flowed through Ani. Caravans laden with silk, spices, and other exotic goods from the East would pass through its gates, while merchants heading in the opposite direction would carry textiles, metals, and other products from the West. The kings of the Bagratid dynasty, who made Ani their capital in 961 AD, grew immensely wealthy by taxing this trade, and they poured this wealth into the beautification and fortification of their city. The architectural achievements of Ani are a testament to this golden age. The city was renowned for the quality of its stone masonry and the innovative genius of its architects. Armenian architects of this period were pioneers of new structural forms, and many scholars believe that their work, with its use of pointed arches, clustered piers, and ribbed vaults, was a major precursor to the Gothic architectural style that would later flourish in Western Europe. The city of 1001 churches was no exaggeration. While not literally 1,000, the city and its immediate surroundings were home to dozens of magnificent churches, cathedrals, and chapels, each one a jewel of medieval architecture. The Cathedral of Ani, completed in 1001 by the famous architect Tridat, is a masterpiece of design, with its soaring, elegant proportions and its complex, sophisticated vaulting. Other famous structures like the Church of St. Gregory of Tigran-Onents, with its stunning interior frescoes, and the Church of the Redeemer, with its unique 19-sided circular design, all speak to a society of immense artistic and spiritual vitality. At its peak, the city is estimated to have had a population of over 100,000 people, making it one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. It was a vibrant, multi-ethnic and multi-religious center, a place where Armenian Christians, Muslims, Zoroastrians, and others lived and traded together, a true crossroads of civilizations. The disappearance of such a magnificent and powerful city was not a single event, but a long and painful process of decline, a death by 1,000 cuts that unfolded over several centuries. The beginning of the end for Ani's golden age can be traced to a series of devastating military conquests. Its very wealth and strategic location made it a tempting prize for the rising powers of the region. In 1064, the city was conquered by the Seljuk Turks, a powerful new empire emerging from Central Asia. The Seljuk conquest, while destructive, did not destroy the city. It continued to function as an important commercial center under its new rulers. However, it was the beginning of a long period of instability, during which the city would change hands multiple times, being ruled by a succession of Seljuk, Georgian, and Kurdish dynasties. This constant political turmoil, while not fatal, began to chip away at the city's stability and prosperity. A more devastating blow came in the 13th century, with the arrival of the Mongols. The Mongol invasions were a cataclysmic event that reshaped the entire political map of Asia and the Middle East. In 1236, the Mongols sacked Ani, massacring a large portion of its population and destroying parts of the city. While Ani did recover to some extent, the Mongol conquest marked a fundamental shift. The old order was shattered, and the city's long-term security was gone. This military devastation was compounded by a major natural disaster. In 1319, Ani was struck by a severe earthquake. The earthquake caused widespread damage, toppling the conical roof of the cathedral and destroying many other buildings. While the city had suffered earthquakes before, this one came at a time when it was already politically and economically weakened, making a full recovery more difficult. The earthquake was a brutal blow to an already ailing city. However, the final fatal blow to the city of Ani was not delivered by an invading army or by the trembling of the earth. It was delivered by a far more subtle and inexorable force: the slow, relentless shift of global trade routes. The very foundation of Ani's wealth and existence was its prime location on the Silk Road. For centuries, this had been the primary artery of commerce between the East and the West. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, the world was changing. The rise of the Ottoman Empire to the west and the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire to the east made the old overland caravan routes more dangerous and less reliable. More importantly, European powers, particularly the Venetians, Genoese, and later the Portuguese, were pioneering new, all-sea routes to the east, sailing around Africa to reach the spice markets of India and beyond. This shift from land-based to sea-based trade was a paradigm shift in the global economy, and it had a devastating impact on the old Silk Road cities. The great caravans that had once flowed through Ani, bringing their wealth and their customers, now dwindled to a trickle. A new network of trade was emerging, one that was centered on the coastal ports of the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Indian Ocean. A city like Ani, located deep in the mountainous interior of Anatolia, was completely bypassed by this new global economy. Its strategic location, once its greatest asset, had become its greatest liability. Its very reason for being had vanished. This economic strangulation was a slow and irreversible process. Without the revenue from trade, the city's rulers no longer had the wealth to maintain its magnificent churches or its massive fortifications. The population, made up of merchants, artisans, and all the people who supported the trade economy, began to drift away. There was simply no longer a living to be made in Ani. They migrated to the new, more prosperous coastal cities, leaving their ancestral homes behind. The decline would have been gradual and heartbreaking. A generation would have seen the markets become less crowded, the caravans less frequent. The next generation would have seen churches fall into disrepair, their congregations having moved away. The city was slowly and inexorably emptying out. By the 15th century, Ani was a shadow of its former self, a provincial town with a glorious past. By the 18th century, it was completely abandoned, home only to a few monks in an isolated monastery. The city of 1001 churches had become a city of ghosts. The verdict on the disappearance of Ani is, therefore, a classic and powerful example of a system's collapse driven by economic and political change. It was not a single event that destroyed the city, but a fatal convergence of multiple factors. The military conquests and the earthquake had weakened it, but it was the fundamental restructuring of the global economy that delivered the killing blow. The story of Ani is a powerful cautionary tale about the transient nature of urban prosperity. It demonstrates that a city's success is often dependent on a specific set of geographical and economic circumstances, and when those circumstances change, even the greatest of cities can become obsolete. Today, the ruins of Ani stand in a state of haunting and fragile beauty. They are located in a militarized zone on the Turkish-Armenian border, and access is still restricted. The great cathedral, its roof gone but its elegant walls still standing, is a testament to the genius of its builders. The crumbling shells of dozens of other churches and chapels are scattered across the plateau, their faded frescoes exposed to the harsh Anatolian elements. The massive double-walled land fortifications, some of the most impressive examples of medieval military architecture in the world, still guard a city that is no longer there. The site is a place of profound melancholy and immense historical importance, a silent monument to a lost Armenian kingdom and a lost world of Silk Road commerce. The story of its long, slow death is a powerful reminder that the forces that create cities, the flows of trade, the balance of power, and the currents of history are the very same forces that can, over time, just as surely destroy them. The ruins of these lost cities are not just monuments to the past. They are powerful warnings, demonstrating how even the most successful societies remain vulnerable to the forces of climate, disease, and the ever-shifting currents of history. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. Stay curious, question everything, and remember the truth is often buried deeper than we think.